Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Here I'm going to be walking you through the N8n workspace, and we'll be focusing on the most important settings that are necessary to get started, and we'll leave some of the advanced stuff for later because it's not really that useful to us. And one of these things is the Manage tab here, where you can sort of upgrade your executions and the number of active workflows you have. So you can take care of that in the Manage section if you wish to. But let's get started and go over to our workspace. All right, so in the workspace, we have a horizontal row of tabs and a vertical column of tabs. Let's get started with the horizontal row. And here we have the most important thing, which are our workflows. And in here we have three workflows, of which one of them happened to be active. So the difference between an active or an inactive workflow is that A, you have a limitation on the number of workflows you can have active dependent on the plan that you're on. So you can't have, say, for example, more than 5 on one of the plans, and that means that you can't have more than 5 of these that are active simultaneously. However, you can have multiple workflows which happen to be inactive or just something that's in the works or in development. That's no issue at all. And the difference between active and inactive is that with active workflows you have a link, which is say a webhook via which the workflow can be activated, or you have other mechanisms that are inside the workflow that automatically trigger that workflow to get activated. However, in the inactive workflows, you don't have that trigger. So, or that trigger will not work. So if you try to go and access that webhook, that is a production webhook versus a testing webhook, it will not work in these two workflows. However, it will work in the outbound system workflow. So let's take a look at the outbound system workflow. Now, at first glance, this might be a little overwhelming, but to be honest, once you guys get a hang of all this, building stuff like this will be super, super easy, I promise you. And if you want to learn how to build something complex like that in a guided fashion, then you can always check out my other Udemy courses or my school community. All the links should be in the description. But anyhow, let's just take a look at the uh, general idea of what's going on here. So I have divided this into different sections. The first section over here is our lead capture into CRM that essentially captures leads into our Salesforce CRM. Then we enrich those leads that we have inside our CRM. Once we're done enriching them, we then qualify them and score them. And lastly, we do our cold outreach, which is that we send a personalized email to that specific lead. So let us go over to the first one of these. And let me just give you an idea of what's going on here. So again, within the different stages or different steps of the outbound system, we have different components that we have built out. And these are not actual components. It is more or less just a logical division that I've done. But making sure that your workflows are divided like this and commented is super, super important in making sure that you can maintain them and come back to them in the future and change them. So the first step of this workflow is importing the leads from the Google Sheet into our CRM. So here we have a Google Sheet module. If I double click into this, you can see that we are getting all the rows from this new leads sheet and or new leads document. And then we have sheet one as the sheet. So we're getting all the rows inside the Google Sheet. And this is called a node. So we have a workflow, which is the entire sort of execution flow that is going to happen when our trigger is triggered from here. And then we have the different nodes through which the execution will flow as it picks up data along the way and makes modifications to it. So once we import all the data from our Google Sheet, we do some modification, where we actually have a loop. So you have multiple different rows. You want to go through every single row. So you have a loop. And then you sort of do some modification on the inputs. Then you insert only the unique leads and you create a new account in the CRM if the company account does not already exist. And here's basically part two of it. And this is going to, once it has completed these steps, it's going to go back to the loop and then pick up the next record and the next record and so on and so on. So if you didn't totally understand that, that's totally fine. I just wanted to expose you to how one of these workflows looks like. And we'll be building, things like these and, maybe even more complex than these in the course. So don't worry about that. But this is just an idea of how a complete system sort of looks like. Now let's go back to the home page. So we took a look at the different workflows. We are going to go over to credentials. So what exactly is a credential? Now, when you create the different nodes, as we saw in the workflow, and you remember that we had a Google Sheet node, you want to be able to log in to your Google Sheet account. And that's essentially what the credential is going to take care of. The credential is going to be, the API key or the service account or, some code or some password, whatever it is going to be what allows you to get access to that specific account. And we have multiple of these different credentials. We have Google Sheets credential, we have Salesforce, Bright Data, Google Drive, again, Notion, and so on and so on. So you need each one of these for the different services or the different nodes that you're going to be having. Now, usually you don't create credentials through here. Usually what happens is you just create them while you're working inside the workflow. But having a tab to see all the credentials allows you to very easily come here and sort of delete additional credentials that might be confusing you or might not be necessary because, as you can see, a lot of these, and sometimes you might have multiple ones and you might not know which one to use. So you can very easily come here and manage all of them. All right, let's go over to executions now. And executions is essentially a log of the different workflows which were executed. So you can see we executed a lot of these outbound system workflows. If I click on the first one of these, and this is a successful execution. So if I click on view, this should bring us to the execution. And in the execution, what we'll essentially see is a snapshot of the data that flowed through the workflow. And in this case, we had data flowing through only this specific section. If I go to any other section, you can see that the connectors, the pipelines or the pipes here are all grayed out, which means that they weren't activated. So if I go over to this lead enrichment section, you can see that we have our nodes and the connectors in between all in green color, which means they indeed did execute. Now, why is this actually useful to us? What's the purpose of seeing an execution like this? When you're going to be working with N8n or even software in general, what happens many times is that things don't work in the first go or in the fifth go or in the 10th go. And you sort of need to be able to see what's happening to the data so that you can make adjustments and make sure that the workflow is working correctly. And part of that is coming over to executions and seeing what data is flowing from one section to another section. So if I double click here, you can actually see the data that came in, and you can also see the data that went out. Now, you can also take a look at the settings that were there, and you can see that how we're not actually able to edit this. In the actual workflow, we can edit this, but since this is a snapshot of the execution, we wouldn't be able to edit these values, but we will have access to the values that ran through the workflow. And this is super useful, as you can probably tell, in finding the errors and fixing them. So that takes care of executions. Let's go back. And okay, so that takes care of the top row over here. let's just go through a couple of these. We can see that we have a plus sign, which allows us to create workflows, credentials, or a project. And I almost never use this, but it is good to see that we can create a project from here, and we can also do that from here. Now, the reason why you might want to create another project is because if you take on multiple clients, you want to be able to separate their workflows and their credentials from each other. Because what will happen is you will have, client A's credentials getting mixed up with client B's credentials, and that's obviously going to create a huge mess. So you can very easily just create a new project right here. And here I'm going to just say my project client B. Save. And here we have our project, and we have our workflows, which actually none of them exist, obviously, because this is a totally new project, and we have none of the credentials carrying over from the personal project. All right, so that takes care of projects. Let's go over to the first one of these. And this is essentially going to take you back to where we came from, which is the dashboard. So that takes you back. That is the admin panel. So now if we go back into the workflow, let's take a look at the next one of these, which is templates. And this honestly is super, super useful because the way they've made it is very easy to copy paste the templates into your own workflow. Let me show you what that means. So if I click on AI, and here you can sort this by relevancy. So when you search, you can get more relevant results and so on. So here they're showing you how to create a short video using OpenAI. But if you sort this by popularity, which shows you what is something that a lot of people are using, and you click on one of these, for example, click on Explore. This window over here is not just an image. This is actually a sort of embedded workflow. And if you double click on any of these, you can actually see the values. You can't edit them, but you can actually see the values already placed inside them. And here again, you can take a look at, let me click on another one. Okay, here you can see again, they have these values already preset. So what this means is when you say select all of this, hit Control C, you can have the entire workflow be copied. And when you go over to, say, a new workflow and do Control V, you can actually paste the entire thing inside your workflow. And this is super, super useful because sometimes you will get stuck and you will not know how to solve a problem. And you can very easily reference the 1,000 or the 1,500 templates that they have and basically copy piece or entire workflow itself and paste it into your workflow and start tinkering with different pieces of it, or just to get an inspiration of how other people have solved the same problem. Now, what will not be copied over is that the licenses and the credentials, which is obvious, right? Because they won't want you to be using their API, they want you to use your own. So that is the use of templates. And we have a couple of these other ones which are not as useful. We have variables, which is essentially a way to set global variables, which are going to be accessed through a execution of the workflow. So essentially, say you want to, save a file name, for example, file1.pdf, or you have a specific website that you want to access and you store that as a variable, and you don't want that variable to be edited, but you want your different workflows to actually use that variable. You can put that inside the global variable. But I rarely use this for my workflows, and it's not really something that you need to worry about at this point. For help, you can come over here, and it seems like they have some documentation, a forum, courses, and so on that you can check out as well. So if you ever need help, you can check it out here. And if we go over to the last one of these, which is the updates, the only reason you would really want to look at this is to make sure that you're not sort of falling far behind in the version. So if you see this version, falling far behind, you can take a look at potentially testing out the new versions to see if they will work. But I will advise strongly against just going and changing the versions willy-nilly, because what can happen is that if you upgrade to from say 1.77 to, I don't know, if they come out with 2.1, 2.5, what will happen is sometimes your workflows will break down. And before you make the change from one version to another, make sure you note down the exact version that you had beforehand so that you can revert back if necessary. So that's about it that you need to worry about in this updates section. And yeah, the settings over here are much more advanced. They're really not necessary to get started, so we will be skipping them over for now. But that is all you should need to know to get started with N8n. There's one last tip that I'll give you, which is to make sure you continuously save your workflows before exiting, because this has happened to me before. And what can happen is you work for an hour, you go and maybe your computer shuts down or you close down the browser for some reason, and you come back and realize that your work did not save because you did not hit the save button, and now you have lost an hour's worth of work. So with that, thank you so much for joining here. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the links in the description to get more resources. If you are a business owner and want to implement AI automation into your business, you can reach out to us and I'll be happy to chat with you. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.